Hello, welcome to Steven Shinder Reviews in video form. Concluding Ape-tember, I guess I'm calling it. My reviews of the Planet of the Apes 1974 TV series, some of which were edited into telefilms in the early 80s. And I've talked about the first four telefilms, or, the pairs of episodes that were part of those. But for this one, I'm talking about not just the final telefilm, Farewell to the Planet of the Apes, but also the other four episodes that were part of the series that were not put into telefilms. So I'm going to start with those leftover episodes, I guess, if you want to call them that. First is The Good Seeds. This is one of the earlier episodes in the series, both in terms of when it was released and when it was filmed, the chronology of that. This I thought was a fascinating watch. Verdon and Burke teaching these people how to farm, and Verdon even has a moment where he's talking about like how to use the good seeds to get good crops, and how he remembers having this conversation with his son Chris, and he has a moment where like he really misses him. You can see it right in his face, and I really like these moments that remind us of their backstory back in their time, and a 20th century Earth. I feel like there weren't enough of those moments in the show throughout, especially with Verdon, given he has a wife, he's a family man, and you would think he'd be exhibiting more misery throughout all of this. But I guess, I don't know, Burke and Galen are such good friends to have around that they sort of alleviate that. I don't know. But there was a fun bit where after the humans are spotted, gorillas come over and interrogate the ape farmers, and one of them goes the extra mile of being like, "Oh, it was me. I entertain the family. We get so bored, so I act like a human." And he puts like flour or something on his face, and it's because I guess all humans look alike apparently, and so they do that whole thing of laughing along with it, and they just believe it, and it's so ridiculous. But I I kind of like some of the goofiness in this, but it is a real reach, the flower. So I don't know about that, but overall, I thought this was a pretty decent episode. Um, I think I'd give him like maybe a 7.75 out of 10. It was entertaining somewhat, and it's better than maybe a couple of the other episodes I've previously talked about. Next, we have The Deception. This one is one of the better ones, I feel. So there's a blind chimp. Her name is Fauna, and her father, Lucian, has died. It begins with this funeral, and she believes that he's been killed by humans, and so she is like really hating humans now. And the wording that she uses, it feels almost verbatim like what Anakin Skywalker says about the Tusken Raiders in Attack of the Clones. Like it's kind of wild how close the dialogue is. And when Anakin says it in Attack of the Clones, it tries to be serious, but the way it comes across and the way culture has dealt with it is it's become a meme, like not just the men, yada yada yada, but the way that Fauna delivers that type of dialogue here, it feels more authentic to me. There's some really good acting in this episode, and she has an uncle named Cestus, which I thought was also bizarre because I know there's a Star Wars novel from the 2000s set during the Clone Wars called The Cestus Deception, and this episode is called The Deception. So this is like really reminding me of Star Wars quite a bit, this episode. But yeah, Fauna is blind, and so when Galen, Verdon, and Burke approach her, she doesn't realize that Galen's companions are humans, and they each use fake names because they're fugitives. And she starts to fall in love with Burke. His voice reminds her of someone else from before, and she even asks to feel his face. And they do the smart thing of having Galen put his face in front of her hands, and she really likes how his face is. So I guess he must have been flattered by what she had to say about his face. But they feel really guilty about this deception, and because her uncle is approaching, they need to come up with an excuse of why Verdon and Burke need to be hidden. So they pretend that they are on the run because they read some banned books, and there's this whole thing of like, well, people should be able to read books, right? Like, but people despise the ideas of these banned books. And there's stuff here that, some thought provoking stuff, like even when it feels like kind of a throwaway thing. But yeah, as Fauna falls in love with Burke, of course, thinking that he has a different name and that he's an ape, Galen yells at her and is like, "You don't know him like I do." They have this intense discussion, and he's trying to figure out what to say to dissuade her from wanting him. And he even fumbles the dialogue a bit because he's like, and he's not an ape that you cannot trust. And I think he's supposed to say you can trust, but it's something like that. It's something where it's supposed to be the opposite of what is said, but I think because it's an argument, you can sort of forgive it, if they just left that in, I guess. But eventually the truth comes out. Uh, this group of apes, I think this is the one where there are some apes who wear these sacks over their heads, and they want to go after humans. Galen goes undercover and it's like, "Oh, my horse was attacked by humans," and eventually the truth of Fauna's father's death comes out, and it's not by humans. And so it's a whole thing, and Burke reveals the truth to her that he is human. And it's a really sad ending. They don't really have uh one of those television endings where something bad has happened, but in the end they reconcile and it's gonna be okay. Like, it sort of just ends. Burke does give her a little kiss. I kind of wonder if that's a little tip of the hat to the first Planet of the Apes film. The human and chimp character kiss. Zira and Taylor in the first movie, but I don't know. But yeah, I thought this was a strongly acted episode. I'd give The Deception 8.5 out of 10. Now, next is The Cure, and not the band. The episode is titled The Cure. This one involves, well, it begins as if it's at the end of an adventure. Verdon, Burke, and Galen are at a human settlement, this village, and the humans there are like, "Are you sure you can't stay?" And they're like, "No, we have to go." And this woman named Amy is in love with Verdon. Yeah, there's a lot of unrequited love here. And it isn't until after the fugitives leave and Galen has this, he shares his grievances with Verdon and I guess Burke about how he wishes that they would be more cautious and not reveal the true nature of like where they're from to people. And then we get this flashback where Verdon is approached by Amy and she says that she's in love with him, but he says like, he has a wife and he's from a different world, which of course is, Earth back in his time. I don't think he ever specifies that he's from the past, even though he knows that. Maybe he feels like it'd be too much to explain. But yeah, I thought that was an odd structure for this episode, but I think it is better to have that as a flashback rather than begin with that interaction, that Amy and Alan discussion. But the village ends up having to deal with malaria. Verdon and Burke know about what malaria is, and so there's this medical professional who's an ape but does not have all the knowledge, and even these gorilla guards show up. One of them is infected and falls off his horse and is just like not moving, and so because the apes are affected, they're like, oh, now it's a problem. When it was just the humans, they're like, okay, whatever, but now because it's affecting them, then they have to deal with it. But yeah, they figure out what to do in terms of medicine, and these episodes feel like they're all about survival and stuff that can apply to humans of any time period, I guess. And trying not to, hammering home that idea that you shouldn't hide knowledge of advancements, scientific advancements and stuff like that, because there are characters who are skeptical about this sort of thing, and it's like too out there, it's not in line with what we know. So I think this is a really smart show. But yeah, I thought this was another one that I thought was pretty good. Maybe not as good as The Deception, but I think I'd give The Cure an 8 out of 10 overall. Next, we have The Liberator, and this is a second to last aired episode, I believe. And according to what source you read, I saw a couple things, like a little note under a description that this may have aired in 74, or it may not have aired until the early 90s because of the controversial elements in it and some conflicts going on at the time around 74. So I don't know, but this episode involves the creation of a poisonous gas. So, and because it would have been the holiday season, maybe that would have been too heavy for them as well. But whatever the case, this episode I thought was interesting because it feels like a TV show version of some of the stuff that was explored in Beneath the Planet of the Apes, kind of. Because there are these humans who want to annihilate the apes with a poisonous gas, and they have these gas masks, and it's basically like the gas mask is what these humans worship. It kind of brings to mind the mutants in Beneath the Planet of the Apes who worshipped a bomb. So, and there's also this whole thing about humans of this place thinking that the gods made apes to be dominant over men. There are humans who believe that, and there are humans who want to annihilate the apes. And they say we're not just gonna stop in the valley, we're gonna try like all over the place. But of course, that conflict gets prevented. But I thought that was a really interesting idea, seeing these humans who are willing to fight back in that way. And it's like there could be a lot of casualties, a lot of fallout as a result of that type of thing. So yeah, I thought it was a pretty heavy episode. It really makes you think. So I think that one's also an 8 out of 10 for me. Now, the next one I'm going to talk about is Tomorrow's Tide. Is it Tomorrow's Tide or Tides of Tomorrow? It's one of those, but it's the first of the pair of episodes that was included in the Farewell to the Planet of the Apes telefilm. Oh, I also forgot to mention, and I think it was in one of the other episodes, Galen has the sack over his head, and you can tell like through the eye holes that he doesn't have the Roddy McDowell seems like he doesn't have the ape makeup. But yeah, I thought that was kind of a funny thing to notice. But yeah, and Tomorrow's Tide, I think that's what it's called. This is the one about fishing. Verdum and Burke get involved in fishing for these apes, and there's like a shark in the water and stuff like that. Yeah, I thought that this was a pretty nice change of scenery. having this episode being it obviously involves fishing, so it's by the water. It doesn't involve, being in some of the typical locations that we would see in these other episodes I've talked about. So, it's on the beach. A lot of uh, involvement of catching fish. There's even fire at some point. But yeah, I thought this was something different. And, it was another one of those things where they're teaching skills that people can use to survive. They've talked about farming and now they're talking about fishing. And the ending for this was quite funny. But I still liked the ending. How Galen, Verdon, and Burke get away from the apes who are in charge of this uh, region or area or whatever by getting on a raft and just paddling away. And I thought that was like kind of funny. Then the other one in this pair, uh, that was part of the Farewell to the Planet of the Apes telefilm, is Up Above the World So High. This begins with Galen seeing, um, a flying, a human on a glider, and he thinks it's a flying reptile. I kind of want to add that before I forget that at the end of Tomorrow's Tide, you do see them get to a different beach, and Galen is like, what's the funny thing he says? He says, "I don't want to have to pull you two out of a scrape right away," and then they chase him, and it's like this funny thing. But yeah, they're good friends all around. But yeah, and Up Above the World So High, he thinks there's a flying reptile, but Verdon and Burke set him straight and say that it's someone using a glider. And so there's a lot of this stuff involving using this glider. And it feels like kind of just a typical episode in the series. It doesn't feel like a natural ending for this series, really. Obviously this show got canceled, so this was not designed as an ending, I don't think. And I'd forgotten how this one ends since the last time I'd seen it, but the way that it ends is Verdon, Burke, and Galen end up on yet another raft, and they paddle out in the ocean. And Galen says he'd rather get shot than what he's experiencing, which is seasickness. And yeah, it just kind of ends there. It ends with these characters out in the water on this raft. But of course, when Farewell to the Planet of the Apes aired, it had these bumpers with Roddy McDowell in old Galen makeup, as I've mentioned before. And so he introduces it as like, as we get to our farewell to the Planet of the Apes, or something like that. And afterward, he says, and there you have it. And he talks about how Verdon and Burke eventually found a computer, and then they were able to fly out into space, and they disappeared and probably went back to their own time. And during these bumpers, Galen also has a computer next to him, so I kind of wonder if that is supposed to be connected, or if it's just, well, we filmed on this set and it's just there, and let's just get Roddy in makeup. I don't know. But Galen talks about how, well, I could have gone with them, but during that time, apes are in zoos. Now, would you come to my time? It's only It'll happen eventually. It's only a matter of time. And it feels all sinister the way he says it, and shows this toy that has like I don't know if it's a chimp or if it's a monkey in place of a chimp. I don't remember, but it shows a toy of a human like doing the drum thing that the symbols that we associate with that sort of monkey toy. Um, and it's like, what the heck, Galen? Are you like anti-human now? Like, what happened to you? But maybe it's just a silly thing for these bumpers. I don't know. But yeah, I do like to take that as what happened. That Verdon and Burke made it off of the Planet of the Apes. Now, if they made it back to their own time or a couple years after their time, how would they act then? They're reunited with their loved ones, the people they know, but would they talk about this future where the apes are dominant, or would they keep silent because nobody would believe them, really? And if you were to fit this show into the continuity of the films, this could only really fit if it's in the not in the circular timeline theory, but in the one timeline creates a second timeline theory. So, I like to imagine that this show, which takes place 3085, is in the past, 1,000 years, give or take, prior to the first Planet of the Apes film. And then, that film and Beneath happen, and then Cornelius and Zira go back, and Escape changes the timeline. So, if this show were to fit in, like, would Alan and Peter still be pre first film, but in the 80s, of course, like way back, or would they somehow end up post Escape, and people are aware of Cornelius and Zira and are afraid of the possibility of apes ruling, and then the plague in the 80s happens, and eventually the Caesar's uprising and conquest happens in 91. I think there's some interesting story potential there that I don't know has really been explored in official Planet of the Apes stuff. There's fan stuff, stuff that fans can write and whatnot, but yeah, I really wonder, like, what would those type of stories be if the franchise put them out? I feel like there's a lot of. Oh, I didn't rate the episode, did I? Up Above the World So High. Um, so Tomorrow's Tide, I think I'd also give an 8. But Up Above the World So High, it kind of felt a bit meandering, and again, just a regular episode. So I think I'd give it a 7.5 out of 10. So collectively, I guess Farewell to the Planet of the Apes, if it's just those two episodes, is a 7.75 out of 10 for me. But yeah, like, this show had some really great ideas that they maybe could have gone further with, and especially if this had gone on a few seasons and then had an ending, and I would have loved to have seen how Verdon and Burke's return would have been handled, how they get back and what it's like when they return. Uh, but as it is, the show feels very episodic. That was TV. It feels kind of, Incredible Hulk, where he runs around, solves a problem, runs to the next place. But I think this would have been better if the show felt like there was more progression. I do like the lessons that are taught along the way, but yeah, like, I feel like a bit more could have been done with this series. So would that have improved ratings? I personally don't know. Maybe this just wasn't the time for this type of show. If there was ever a time, like, I really don't know. But overall, I enjoyed this show. It was great to revisit it, and like I said, I really like these characters: Verdon, Burke, and Galen. Great characters to root for, even if more could have been done with them in some aspects. Um, so, yeah, I'm looking through my notes and seeing if there's anything else I want to say. Oh, so I was trying to think of how would I have, those leftover episodes that were not telefilms, could any of those have been paired with each other to be a telefilm? So what I came up with was The Deception and The Cure could be Unrequited Love on the Planet of the Apes, and The Good Seeds and The Liberator could have been Survival on the Planet of the Apes. However, I feel like The Good Seeds and Tomorrow's Tide um, work really well back to back. So take Tomorrow's Tide out of Farewell to the Planet of the Apes, pair it with The Good Seeds, and I would call that farming and fishing on the Planet of the Apes. And with Tomorrow's Tide swapped out, I would say put the Liberator into Farewell to the Planet of the Apes, because then you have this potential for a huge conflict between humans and apes, and then you get the actual final episode. But yeah, those are just some stray thoughts and whatnot. So yeah, I'm glad I was able to cover this before the end of September, as there's some other things I want to do for October on this channel. Will I ever cover the animated series Return to the Planet of the Apes? I mean, I don't know. It's possible. Maybe someday. There are definitely some other Planet of the Apes topics I've been thinking of talking about, but things always come up, and so maybe I'll get to some other Planet of the Apes things. But for October, it's gotta be something different, and you'll see what it is. But yeah, thanks for tuning in, and until next time, this is Steven Schinder reviews in video form. So happy Ape-tember.